Welcome back to Social 20-1, Lesson 10. What am I going to do after this lesson? I don't know. I don't have enough fingers. Failure of the League of Nations. Following this lesson, students should be able to use an assortment of viewpoints to understand fully why the League of Nations failed. And we're going to add some more terms to your glossary of key terms, including appeasement. Here's the assignment to do today. In your notes, please use the following assortment of viewpoints to understand fully why the League of Nations failed. The League of Nations was the first intergovernmental organization that was established after World War I in order to try and maintain the peace. Unfortunately, the League failed miserably in its intended goal, to prevent another world war from happening. World War II broke out only 2 decades later. So that's how we quantify that it failed. That's how we know it failed. But we're trying to also look at why did it fail. The idea was for the League of Nations to prevent wars through disarmament, collective security, and negotiation. So if that was the idea that we can prevent war by doing these things, having nations disarm, achieve collective security, and negotiate, obviously the negotiations are going to break down. Negotiations will break down. There will be no collective security as a result, and nations will arm instead of disarm. Simple as that, right? It was also involved in other issues such as drug trafficking, arms trade, and global health. Although the League disbanded during World War II, it was replaced with the United Nations, which is still going strong today. I think I'm going to get rid of the word strong. I'm not sure that that's 100% accurate. The League of Nations had several integral weaknesses that finally led to its demise. So here it is. Here's the integral ones, the important ones. The League was supposed to prevent the world and encompass all countries. The League was supposed to present the world and encompass all countries, but many countries never even joined the organization, of which the United States was the most prevalent one. So why did the League fail? The absence of the power of the USA. Some members only remained members for a short while before ending their relationship, their membership. Many historians believe that if America had joined the League, there would have been a lot more support in preventing conflicts. Other major powers such as Germany and the Soviet Union were not even allowed to join. So you have the two superpowers of the 21st or the 20th century, and you have the other major power that nearly won World War II in the 1930s and 40s in Europe. You have a lot of power outside the League, more power outside than within the League. That's a common observation. The international relations of member countries conflicted with the League's requirements for collective security. So, we wanted collective security, but those pillars, those 4 main countries within the League, Japan, Italy, Britain, and France, they had their own agendas. And the two things didn't always marry well together. The League didn't have its own armed force and depended upon members to act, but none of the member states were ready for another war and didn't want to provide military support. Pacifism was a great problem. The League's 2 largest members, Britain and France, were very reluctant to resort in sanctions and military actions. They're still recovering from World War I. They don't want to jump into another war. Disarmament was highly advocated by the League, which meant that it deprived countries that were supposed to act with military force on its behalf when necessary from means to do so. So disarmament actually was one of the visions. Okay, we can prevent war in the future if we disarm, but because they disarmed, the members of the states, because they disarmed, they didn't have the weapons to prevent war. That's kind of a nice little paradox. When countries started to attack others in order to expand, the League didn't have any power to stop them or any resolve to. So, viewpoint 2, some reasons the League failed. The United States didn't join. We've already talked about that. The Treaty of Versailles. The terms of the treaty unfairly penalized Japan. During doing so, made joining the League more of a punishment than a boon. The establishment of the UN after World War II didn't make the same mistake, which was partially why it has been more successful. Not completely successful. That would be pretty overstated. The limited scope of the League. Many countries which would have been beneficial to the League simply weren't invited. I'm looking at you, Germany. I'm looking at you, USSR. The general instability of the League, many of the founding members simply withdrew from it as it became apparent that the League was unstable and that its interests clashed with their own, Japan, Italy. The myriad failings of the League's diplomacy, the League was unable to prevent foreign incursions or negotiate the resolutions successfully after they occurred, and there's some examples there. Colonialism. Colonialism was simply incompatible with the League's existence. While UN managed to survive during colonialism, it did so in the wake of World War II and during the collapse of colonialism. So the League's members, the main members, had colonies, and that really did a lot to discredit the League. Viewpoint 3. The League of Nations was the first attempt at an international organization of states to maintain peace and promote international cooperation, but it failed. Below are the few reasons in brief. The political background of Europe at the time of the birth of the League was not very conducive to a peace organization. World War I had been fought ostensibly to make the world safe for democracy, to end all future wars, but essentially it was an imperialist war for the division and redecision of colonies. The imperialist character of the peace handicapped the League throughout its history. At no stage in its history did the League represent the world balance of forces. The USA never became its member. Russia stepped in only in 1934. Thus, its effectiveness as an instrument of world peace suffered. In absence of Russia and America, it was actually dominated by the Anglo-French powers. So Anglo is Britain, Anglo-French powers, and became an instrument of their policy in Europe. And since these powers were not interested in peace so much as in maintenance of their imperialist domination and destruction of the Soviet Union, the League never had a chance to succeed. The League of Nations was founded in the principle of union of all the members except those who were party to a dispute. This, every single member, including the smalls, had a right to vote. So many people had a right to vote. Very hard to build consensus, right? The world was divided into two social systems, the capitalist and the socialist. The absence of Russia created a very real danger that the League might be used against the new socialist state. Unfortunately, this danger proved to be real. The League was condoned. The League, which condoned fascist aggressions one after another, wasted no time in violating its own principles by expelling the USSR on the question of Finland. The spheres of activity of the Council and the Assembly were not clearly defined. It created confusion. What's your responsibility? What's my responsibility? And the responsibility for maintenance of peace was not securely placed anywhere. The Council of the League, which alone could shoulder, it was burdened with other responsibilities. Despite all these flaws, the League could have been an instrument of peace if the powers dominated had wished it to be so. The article of the Covenant of the League provided for economic and military sanctions against the aggressors, but the League failed because the leading powers never wanted a durable peace. There's a cartoon that looks at the toothless tiger that is the League of the Nations. A blind, deaf, dumb tiger with 3 legs. The League remained silent as the world began to collapse. You can definitely read a little bit more about that idea here. Here, the cartoon is quite clear that the gap in the bridge that would make a structure that could have some purpose is the missing keystone, the USA. That the League had Belgium and France and England and Italy, but it's missing that keystone, and without the keystone, this bridge is going to collapse. Even though it's designed by the President of the United States, its missing of that keystone means that it's going to fail. Here it talks about the 1931 conflict in China between Mao's communist guerrillas and Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist rising, and Stalin aiding the former. Japan saw this as a ripe opportunity, and fearing the rise of China, they invaded Manchuria and established a buffer state of Manchukuo. This was accepted in the League as a violation of the rules. However, the only 2 powers within the League capable of taking action, Britain and France, were not interested, and neither was the USA. They condemned and berated Japan fiercely, but only verbally. The proud nationalist Japanese were furious beyond measure and walked out of the League. Strike 2. So strike 1 was back here, right? Strike 1. the U.S. Senate desired to achieve some amendments to the League, and they decided to not go in. Third strike we see here, we have Mussolini in the middle, and you have the rights and wrongs of Abyssinia shown on the right. The League is contemptible. The League can do nothing. So the idea that Mussolini observes Japan's aggression in Manchuria, and now Italy's being aggressive in Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia. And he's like, well, if the League's not going to do anything against Japan, they're not going to do anything against Italy. And we see a trend towards more aggressive foreign policies of invasions because they're getting away with it. So over the course of 1933 and 1936, Hitler came to power, walked out of the League. Mussolini invaded Ethiopia between Britain and France. Once again, couldn't be bothered to do anything since they figured they had enough colonies of their own in Africa. In the USA, FDR was going to have elections soon, and it said that he didn't want to antagonize the Italian-American community and thus didn't intervene. Hitler does then go and invade the Rhineland in 1936, Austria in 38, and the Czech state in 39. The League remained silent. And you could say, strike three, you're out. So what are the three strikes? Japan invades Manchuria, Italy invades Abyssinia, and Germany begins to annex territories or invade territories on its borders. A large part of the League failing to act was a result of the Allies, namely the United States, Britain, and France, being too isolationist, maybe for the first, and too complacent for the latter two, about the situation, and too easygoing about the East Asian mess. They simply stood and watched as everything went badly, and Hitler's armies rode out across East Europe right up to the Soviet border. The U.S. had nothing to say to Japan and Germany for walking out, because how can you blame them for walking out when you yourself had never joined? The Allies didn't see their national interests threatened. Chamberlain was following an appeasement policy, which we'll get into in the next video, with Hitler, and then boom, in a span of a few years, World War II. So the League began with great promise, but it fell asleep in Abyssinia after prolonged non-implementation of policy of sanctions. And that's why it failed. And the cartoon is suggesting that the death of the League casts a dark shadow on the UN. Interesting. Here you have the power and the might of the German military increasing its pressure on Austria and others. Here you have Mussolini from Italy using poison gas upon the Abyssinian people, and he's suggesting he can do that because they're not civilized. So the emergence of powerful dictators, their reactions or lack of reacting to invasions of Abyssinia and Manchuria, this is why the League fails. So what was the purpose of the League? Collective security. Hard to achieve when there's more power outside the League than within. Hard to achieve when they had no peacekeeping army. The League had no means of enforcing its decisions other than the effect of world opinion. If a power chose to be defiant, there's nothing really effective that the League could do. Here's an additional 8-minute video that you can look at for more information. This is why many in America didn't want to join the League. So there's some practice assessment here. And there you go. The League of Nations and its failures.